Everybody, Paul Vojchehoske, and welcome to Nebraska Landlord. I'm continuing my series on legislative bills that have been introduced to the Nebraska legislature. The next one I want to talk about is LB 980. It was introduced by Carolyn Boson, B-O-S-N, and this is an interesting one. There's a little history here. Might be a little longer video. So, we're seeing a push. Well, the nature of the bill is it would guarantee a tenant's right to a jury trial. Right now in Nebraska, if someone is being evicted for non-payment of rent or anything else, it's a bench trial, meaning that the judge is not only the judge, but also the jury, that he or she makes the decision, and then it's very efficient, it's very time-saving, but there are some constitutional issues with this. So across the United States, we're seeing more and more states and jurisdictions like Philadelphia in their city courts. What they are doing is guaranteeing a tenant a right to a jury trial. Now, again, we don't have that in Nebraska. It's a constitutional issue. Last year, there was a bill, LB 101, that was introduced that did the same thing, but it was very strict. The tenant could not waive their rights, so it was just very strict. It was a huge hurdle to even get it out of committee, let alone passed into law. There was a lot of barriers and a lot of obstacles to overcome. The state senator that introduced it and the nonprofits that were pushing behind it in support took the opportunity to go for that home run, because the Nebraska the Nebraska Supreme Court a couple years before that, in a ruling, kind of inferred that it should be a constitutional right. So what happened is there was a tenant who was being evicted. The tenant moved out before the eviction was right, meaning before the eviction actually happened, the tenant moved out anyways. However, she was represented by legal aid, and they went ahead with the case anyways. It made it all the way to the Nebraska Supreme Court. And their legal argument was the tenant should not have been evicted because of the bench trial. The tenant is legally, constitutionally entitled to a jury trial. And they're kind of not wrong. The Supreme Court didn't allow it. Basically, they what did they do? They struck it down based on the fact that it was a moot point, meaning because the tenant had moved out before the eviction, they had no standing to bring the lawsuit anymore. So the case was thrown out, but 3 of the 7 Nebraska Supreme Court justices made a comment in their ruling that said there are serious constitutional issues with bench trials. They believe that the tenant was entitled to a jury trial for this. So there is another case that's making its way through the courts. I'm not going to talk about that, but it is interesting that LB 980 was introduced this year. It is not as drastic as LB 101 that was introduced last year. And if it's passed, what it does is the default trial for evictions is a jury trial. However, it would allow the housing provider and the tenant to negotiate that. So the landlord could put a provision into the lease agreement waiving the tenant's right to a jury trial. And as long as that tenant signed the lease agreement, then it would be a bench trial like we have now. The other thing that it does is it allows for attorney's fees. Now, right now, there are several parts of the landlord-tenant statute that if you're the losing party in a court case, then the winning party can ask the judge for court costs and reimbursement for attorney's fees. It's never granted. In fact, it's never granted so much that no attorney even asks for them. I believe here, if this passes, you're going to start seeing more and more of the nonprofits, legal aid, Creighton Law, those type of entities. They will start asking for court costs and reimbursement for legal fees. And based on the pool of judges we have in Lancaster, which is Lincoln, and Douglas County, which is Omaha, I can see those judges granting those concessions for the tenant but I don't see them doing the same thing for the landlords. Just saying, that would be an interesting thing to watch if this passed, to see how that develops. So it's interesting in that Senator Carolyn Bosin is a Republican. Almost every anti-landlord type legislative bill that I have seen in recent years was introduced by a Democrat. She's the first one that I've seen really introduce an anti-industry legislative bill. I believe the reason it's being introduced, and I believe the reason that it's being introduced in the way that it is because the writing is on the wall. I think if that other court case that's going through the system now makes it to the Supreme Court, Legal Aid is going to ensure that that case is ripe. And I believe we already know 3 out of the 7 think that it's a constitutional issue just having bench trials. I think it's easy to pick up a 4th justice, and then the courts are going to make the decision. Part of me does not want this to pass. The other part of me does, simply because, not because jury trials are more efficient, they're not. In all the jurisdictions that I've researched where there is a jury trial, it's 6 to 9 months to get them out. My thing is if it gets overturned at the Supreme Court level, we could see that it'll be chaos. At least here, there is a process that's codified. We have a process where we can waive it. We can put a provision in the lease agreement ahead of time so that the tenant agreeing to waive the right to a jury trial. So it gives us the tools to work with. So I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that will get caught up at least one time going, I didn't know, so I didn't have it in my lease, and that's going to happen. But the alternative is I don't think it's healthy for the court to make the ruling and then establish the chaos, because that's what's going to happen. The other thing to think about here, if you go to Lincoln or you go to Douglas County or Lancaster and watch their evictions, I mean, there's dozens of evictions every week. Think about the number of jurors we're going to have to fulfill that requirement. Hence, 6 to 9 months to get an eviction done. So that's probably the most impactful of all the ones here that I've seen so far. I'm sure there's going to be a dozen or two more in the coming weeks, which I will continue to do more videos and newsletters, bringing you up to date. So again, the best way to stay up to date is, number one, join our Facebook group for Nebraska Landlord, or just Nebraska Landlords and Managers. Go ahead and join that, and then subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Just go to nebraskalandlord.com, and I'll keep you up to date on everything. That's all I got, everybody. Thanks for listening.